Harmony Gulch awaits. The wind, a sandpaper whisper against the weathered siding, cut through Harmony Gulch. Minute cyclones of grit pirouette down the main thoroughfare, echoing the town's own precarious existence. A solitary tumbleweed, desiccated and faded, pirouette past the rusty spur saloon's swinging doors, a morbid dance observed by none. Within, Old Man Hemlock, Harmony Gulch's self-proclaimed scholar and most dedicated imbiber, slumbered, his head resting on a whiskey-stained edition of Moby Dick. Flies, fat and iridescent, droned around his glass, the sole audible presence in the suffocating quiet. Aloft, vultures wheeled in languid circles, perhaps lured by the scent of ruin that clung to the settlement like a second skin. Once grand buildings, their facades spiderwebbed with cracks, stood as mute testaments to an evaporated prosperity. The golden vein had petered out years prior, leaving behind a legacy of broken aspirations and festering resentment. Then, a mirage on the horizon, a wavering distortion in the heat-soaked air. A lone rider, approaching from the south. Sheriff Brody, his belly straining against the closure of his faded blue shirt, shielded his gaze. He'd been meticulously carving a star from a piece of scrap wood, a pointless endeavor to somehow revive the authority his badge represented. A stream of tobacco juice stained the dust near his boots. Never a good sign, he grumbled, more to the parched air than anything else. Never nothing good comes from that way. He unfolded himself from his porch rocker, his joints protesting with a chorus of snaps and groans. He hadn't drawn his weapon in what felt like eons, and a rising premonition whispered that today that might change. Harmony Gulch was a place where stagnation flourished, not confrontations. Closer, the rider resolved into a figure mounted on horseback. Not male, as Brody had first presumed, but a woman. Her outline was etched against the declining sun, obscuring details. Yet, the way she sat, unyielding and erect, conveyed a sense of resolve. Across the street, Martha, the baker, momentarily halted her sweeping of her shop front. A dusting of flour ornamented her cheek, a badge of honor for her unending commitment to her failing enterprise. A novel sight in Harmony Gulch after months of the same worn faces, piquing a faint curiosity. Even Old Man Hemlock roused within the dimly lit saloon, his snores transforming into a low, rumbling growl. He blinked, his gaze struggling to lock onto the form in the distance. "Bad news," he croaked, his words viscous with whiskey. "I smell bad news." As the rider approached, the townsfolk congregated, drawn by an unseen force. They emerged from their dwellings, their faces etched with a blend of trepidation and morbid fascination. They stood assembled in the street, a silent, vigilant audience, awaiting their next misfortune. Brody identified the animal first, a robust Appaloosa, its coat retaining a sheen despite the accumulated grime. It was a horse indicative of care, of resources, of someone alien to Harmony Gulch. Then he discerned her features, a countenance etched with hardship, framed by dark hair drawn back severely. Her eyes, shaded by the broad brim of her hat, were like polished obsidian, reflecting the last vestiges of daylight. There was a starkness to her jaw, a testament to untold ordeals and steadfast determination. But the gasp that escaped the townsfolk was not for her appearance. It was for what she bore. Draped across the saddle horn, swaddled in a threadbare woolen blanket, was the unmistakable form of a child. Small, still, silent. A wave of hushed murmurs coursed through the onlookers. Martha stifled a sob, clutching her chest. Even Old Man Hemlock cleared his head, his eyes widening with dawning comprehension. Brody felt a cold fist clench in his gut. He knew, with a certainty that cut him to the quick, that this woman had not journeyed to Harmony Gulch for idle pleasantries. She had come for something altogether more sinister. Esmeralda halted her horse at the town's edge, her gaze sweeping across the assembled inhabitants. She remained silent, offering no greeting. Her eyes, unwavering and glacial, held them in thrall. The quiet stretched, dense and oppressive, broken only by the shifting hooves of her mount and the distant screech of a hawk spiraling above. Then she spoke, her voice a low rasp, yet carrying the force of a desert squall. "Which one of you dogs did this?" "A mother's burden." The sun beat down on Esmeralda's back, each ray a hammer blow. Dust devils danced in her wake as her horse, a sturdy Appaloosa named Jericho, plodded down Harmony Gulch's main street. Samuel lay cradled in her arms, his small body unnaturally still. His dark curls, usually bouncing with life, were matted against his forehead. The air, thick with the scent of dry earth and stale beer, did little to mask the faint, acrid odor of death that clung to them both. A dog, a mangy mutt with ribs showing through its patchy fur, yapped at Jericho's heels, then slunk away, tail tucked between its legs. The sound, however, had already broken the fragile silence. Heads turned. From the shadowed porch of the saloon, a group of men paused in their card game, squinting at the approaching figure. A woman, dust-covered and grim, slumped in the saddle. "Looks like trouble," someone drawled, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. Esmeralda ignored them. Her gaze was fixed on the ramshackle buildings lining the street, each one a testament to Harmony Gulch's slow decay. The general store, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin. The blacksmith shop, its anvil cold and silent. The church, its steeple leaning precariously to one side, as if weary of holding its cross aloft. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. "Who is that? What's she carrying? Looks like a body." A nervous giggle quickly stifled. As she drew closer, the whispers turned to mutters, then to outright laughter. "Look at that crazy woman!" a man shouted, his voice thick with liquor. "Bringing her dead kid to town. What'd she expect us to do? Bury him for her." Another joined in, his voice mocking. "Maybe she thinks we're running a charity funeral parlor now. Got enough problems of our own without burying other folks' mistakes." Esmeralda's grip tightened on Samuel. Her knuckles were white. She heard their taunts, each word a shard of glass piercing her heart. But she would not break. She would not give them the satisfaction. She kept her eyes forward, her jaw set. Sheriff Clem Abernathy sat on the porch of his office, a dilapidated building that looked more like a storage shed than a symbol of law and order. He watched Esmeralda's approach with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the table beside him, attracting a swarm of flies. Clem was a man of considerable girth, his belly straining against the buttons of his worn vest. He was more comfortable with paperwork and naps than with confronting unruly citizens or investigating crimes. Harmony Gulch hadn't seen a real crime in years, unless you counted Old Man Hemlock's habit of stealing peaches from Mrs. Gable's orchard. He sighed, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Now what's this all about?" he muttered to himself. He took another bite of his sandwich, chewing slowly, his eyes glued to the scene unfolding before him. The laughter grew louder as Esmeralda rode past the saloon. One man even mimed cradling a baby, rocking back and forth and making cooing sounds. Others clapped and cheered, their faces flushed with drink and cruel amusement. Clem frowned. He knew these men. They were the dregs of Harmony Gulch, the ones who had given up on life and found solace in cheap whiskey and petty cruelty. He should probably do something, tell them to knock it off. But he didn't. He knew how easily things could escalate in a town like this, how quickly a simple joke could turn into a brawl. And Clem hated brawls. They were messy, loud, and required him to actually do some work. He took another bite of his sandwich. Maybe she'd just ride on through. Maybe she was just passing through on her way to somewhere else. He hoped so. He really did. This whole situation just felt uncomfortable. Esmeralda reached the center of town, right in front of the church. She pulled Jericho to a halt. The laughter died down, replaced by an uneasy silence. All eyes were on her now, their expressions a mixture of morbid curiosity and veiled hostility. She sat there for a moment, a statue of grief and defiance. Then, slowly, deliberately, she dismounted. The movement was stiff, betraying the exhaustion that gnawed at her bones. She held Samuel close, his weight a constant reminder of her unbearable loss. Clem watched from his porch, his sandwich forgotten. He swallowed hard. This wasn't just some crazy woman passing through. This was something else entirely. Something he didn't want to deal with. But he knew, deep down, that he wouldn't be able to ignore it. Not anymore. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. A fly buzzed lazily around Clem's head. Esmeralda took a step forward, her boots kicking up dust. The townsfolk shifted nervously, their eyes darting from her to Samuel and back again. She stood there, a lone figure against the backdrop of Harmony Gulch's decay, a mother with a burden too heavy to bear. The question, Esmeralda, stopped dead in Harmony Gulch's heart, dust devils pirouetting around her like jeering imps. The weathered buildings, painted in the faded hues of forgotten dreams, seemed to huddle closer, hungry for the drama. The laughter, once a relentless hornet swarm, fizzled into a charged quiet. She carefully unwrapped Samuel from the tattered quilt, the rough weave a scratchy contrast to his still, chilled flesh. This measured act pulled a collective breath from the onlookers. Lifting him, the afternoon sun gilded the tender slope of his cheek, the stark immobility of his form. He resembled a slumbering angel misplaced in a den of iniquity. From the general store's shaded porch, Sheriff Clem Abernathy watched, his insides nodding. The mirth had vanished, leaving a bitter, perilous aftertaste. He'd witnessed too much depravity to misread the storm gathering. He wished, not for the first time, he could be anywhere else. Esmeralda's voice, when it shattered the quiet, was not a lament, but a honed shard of glass, ringing with a chilling clarity. It sliced through the oppressive air like a sudden lightning strike. Who murdered my son? The question hung, a leaden weight of accusation. A cur yelped, tail tucked, and vanished into the shadowy embrace of the saloon alley. A gust rattled the blacksmith sign, a fleeting distraction from the palpable tension. Silence descended, deeper, heavier, smothering the brazen whispers that had dared mock Esmeralda's sorrow. Clem saw subtle shifts. Old Hemlock, the livery owner, coughing nervously. Martha Bellwether, the town busybody, her usually flapping lips pressed into a thin line. No one dared meet Esmeralda's unwavering stare. He scanned the crowd, a practice sweep honed by years of preventing outright war, or at least maintaining a semblance of order in this forsaken place. Young Billy Crandall, normally the most boisterous, was staring at his boots, his face burning with a telltale flush. He filed it away. Small clues often bloomed into ugly truths. Esmeralda remained unyielding. Samuel is still weight in her arms. Her dark, piercing eyes raked the faces before her, demanding answers. She was a force unleashed, a tempest of grief and rage, and the townsfolk, so quick to scorn and deride, now stood exposed in her whirlwind. The silence stretched, unbearable. Clem felt sweat bead on his spine, despite the biting air. He knew, with bone-deep certainty, that Harmony Gulch teetered on the precipice of profound change. The festering rot was about to be laid bare. At last, a reedy voice cut through the tension. Mrs. Gable, the schoolteacher, known for her quiet nature and steadfast piety, stood near the rear, her face bleached white, her hands clasped tightly. "Esmeralda," she stammered, her voice trembling like a leaf. We don't know." Esmeralda's gaze snapped to Mrs. Gable, impaling her. "Someone does," she said, her voice a low, dangerous current. "Someone here knows who stole my son." Clem levered himself off the porch railing. He couldn't simply stand by any longer. This was spiraling swiftly. He stepped into the dusty street, boots crunching on the parched earth. "All right, folks," he said, his tone deliberately measured, projecting a confidence he didn't feel. "Let's all just calm down. Esmeralda, why don't you come with me? We can discuss this in my office." Esmeralda didn't even acknowledge him. Her attention remained riveted on the crowd, her eyes blazing with an implacable fire. "I'm not going anywhere without an answer," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "My son deserves justice." Clem sighed inwardly. He'd hoped to avert this, to diffuse the volatile atmosphere before it ignited. But he knew Esmeralda wouldn't yield, and he knew, deep down, he couldn't force her. He surveyed the faces, a canvas of fear, guilt, and morbid fascination. He knew the truth resided within one of them. The question was, would they dare to reveal it? And what cataclysm would follow if they did? He felt the weight of his badge, a heavy burden on his chest. Harmony Gulch stood poised to learn a harsh lesson, and he was the reluctant instructor. Whispers and shadows. The dust devils were gone, yet the disquiet Esmeralda had unearthed in Harmony Gulch clung to the air, as oppressive as a shroud. Leaving Samuel to repose temporarily at the undertaker's, a fragile stillness she knew was ephemeral, she channeled the muted agony etched on his face into a steely resolve. He wouldn't simply become another nameless casualty swallowed by the brutal West. Pettigrew's Emporium was her first port of call, a place brimming with everything from whorehound drops to harness cream, all sheltered beneath a raftered ceiling infused with the pungent aroma of dried botanicals and cured leather. Pettigrew, his visage a tapestry of lines woven by sun and sorrow, regarded her approach with guarded suspicion. "Mornin'," he croaked, his voice a rustling whisper. "I'm seeking information regarding my son, Samuel," Esmeralda stated, her tone unwavering despite the betraying tremor in her fingers. He toiled in the mines. Did he make any purchases recently? Mention anything out of the ordinary? Pettigrew's gaze flitted toward a stack of mattocks before settling back on her. Samuel was a decent fellow, always courteous. Obtained his supplies here. Can't rightly say I recall anything unusual. He buffed the counter with a cloth, sidestepping her gaze. Esmeralda advanced, the mingling sense of cloves and grime filling her lungs. He discovered something, Mr. Pettigrew. A substantial nugget, I understand. Did he confide in you about it? Pettigrew's hand froze. Nugget? Can't say as he did. Miners are forever unearthing trifles. Nothing noteworthy. Esmeralda recognized the lie. The barely perceptible clenching of his jaw, the furtive darting of his eyes, unmistakable indicators. News travels fast, Mr. Pettigrew. Harmony Gulch isn't so vast that secrets remain buried for long. She turned to depart, tossing a silver cartwheel onto the polished surface. I shall return should my memory require refreshing. The blacksmith, a mountainous man named Silas, boasting arms resembling gnarled ironwood, offered even less. The resounding clang of his hammer reverberated through the smithy, a percussive denial to her inquiry. Samuel had entrusted him with or for a saying. She was certain he had noted the gold's quality, appraised its value. Samuel, Silas grumbled, plunging a white-hot horseshoe into a quenching trough with a furious hiss. Finelad, diligent worker, can't claim to know anything about no gold nugget. His eyes, dark beads gleaming with the furnace's reflection, harbored no warmth. Esmeralda observed his labor, the sinews in his back contracting and expanding with each hammer blow. He placed his faith in you, Silas. Do not sully his memory with falsehoods. Silas ceased hammering, the ensuing quiet broken only by the fire's crackle. Men grow covetous, lady. Gold breeds malfeasance. Better to let sleeping dogs lie. He resumed his task, effectively terminating the discourse. The Golden Nugget Saloon served as her concluding destination for the day, a boisterous sanctuary for miners and transient wanderers alike. The atmosphere was saturated with the reek of flat ale, rot-gut whiskey, and desperation. A pianist hammered out a somber melody in the corner, his fingers dancing across the keys with practiced dexterity. She approached the barmaid, a woman brandishing a shrewd gaze and an uncompromising manner. "Whiskey," Esmeralda declared, her voice cutting through the hubbub. "And information. I seek anyone acquainted with Samuel." The barkeep, who went by Maggie, poured a generous measure and nudged it across the wood. Samuel was a regular. Quiet, kept himself mostly. Played poker now and then, wasn't much good at it. Did he discuss his work? Maggie wiped the counter with an ingrained habit. Miners gab about their good fortune, their bad luck. It's all they have. She paused, her eyes narrowing discernibly. He did mention discovering something substantial. Said he was going to be a wealthy man. Esmeralda felt a flicker of hope, promptly extinguished by the knowledge of Samuel's destiny. Did he reveal to whom he showed it? Whom he trusted? Maggie hesitated, her gaze veering towards a knot of men clustered around a poker table in the recess. He said he was partnered with someone familiar with the land, someone who could assist him with its appraisal. She leaned in, her voice a hushed murmur. He also indicated he suspected he was being swindled. The piano's music swelled, a jarring accompaniment to the grim possibilities coalescing in Esmeralda's thoughts. Defrauded, deceived, murdered. The puzzle pieces were beginning to align, painting a portrait of avarice and treachery. She swallowed the whiskey in one gulp, the searing liquid a meager balm against the onslaught of her rising fury. "Thank you, Maggie," she stated, placing a coin on the counter. "You have been more helpful than you realize." As she emerged back into the gloaming, Harmony Gulch's murmurs seemed to pursue her, carried on the breeze. Samuel's murderer lurked nearby, concealed within the shadows, and Esmeralda vowed to expose them, regardless of the cost. Snake Eye's shadow. Jed Hawkins' name wormed its way into Esmeralda's thoughts, insidious as a desert rattler. The barmaid's warning lingered after she left the saloon. Samuel was worried. Said his partner turned rapacious. Called him Snake Eye Jed. The Harmony Gulch Hotel, a dilapidated two-story structure, displayed paint peeling like a bad sunburn. Esmeralda strode toward its entrance, her boot heels clicking a sharp tattoo on the wooden planks, disrupting the drowsy buzz of insects. Inside, a solitary man slouched over a checkerboard, a half-empty glass of whiskey nearby. He wore a dusty duster, a greasy cravat, and a permanent scowl etched into his gaunt face. One eyelid drooped slightly, giving him the unsettling air of a predator assessing its prey. This had to be him. "Hawkins?" Esmeralda inquired, her voice honed to a keen edge. He glanced up, his good eye narrowing to a squint. "Depends on the inquisitor." "Esmeralda, Samuel's mother." The scowl deepened into a sneer. "Samuel's unfortunate demise. My sympathies." The words rang false, like a tin bell. Esmeralda dragged up a chair, ignoring any pretense of welcome. "I hear you two were partnered." "Business acquaintances," he corrected, his gaze drifting back to the board. "Briefly, a failed venture." "The cause?" Snake-eyed Jed gave a dry, grating chuckle. "Let's just say Samuel lacked the stomach for prospectings. Inherent perils." Esmeralda leaned in, her gaze unwavering. "What perils?" He shrugged, the duster whispering like dried reeds. "The risk of barren claims. The risk of inclemency. The risk of unwanted attention." "Did Samuel attract such attention, Mr. Hawkins?" Jed finally locked eyes with her, a flicker of something akin to apprehension, or perhaps mere irritation, crossing his face. "Look, lady, I barely knew the boy. We spent a few days scrambling in the foothills. He lost heart, wanted out. I bought his share. Finest." Esmeralda remained unconvinced. "I understand." Samuel struck color. "Gold." A muscle spasmed in Jed's jawline. "Gossip. Towns like this thrive on it. And I hear you cultivate debts, Mr. Hawkins. Debts that might drive a man to extreme measures." The air thickened with unspoken accusations. Jed's grip tightened around his glass. "You accusing me of something, ma'am? I am soliciting answers." He surged to his feet, sending the chair sprawling. Whiskey splashed across the floorboards, darkening the wood. "Get out. I owe you nothing." Esmeralda stayed put, her eyes locked on his. "People in Harmony Gulch whisper, Mr. Hawkins. They say your temper flares easily." His face darkened with angry blood. "Get out," he bellowed, his voice resounding in the desolate lobby. "Before I expedite your departure." Esmeralda rose slowly, her hand grazing the butt of the revolver nestled in her waistband. "I'll be watching you, Mr. Hawkins. Every breath you take." She turned and exited the hotel, leaving him fuming. As she stepped back onto the porch, She caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure darting around the corner. An eavesdropper. The encounter with Snake Eye Jed had crystallized her suspicions. He concealed something, and she would unearth it. The barmaid's information, coupled with Jed's response, formed a disturbing picture. Samuel had located gold. Jed coveted it, and now Samuel was pushing up daisies. The fragments were beginning to coalesce, but more was needed. She needed someone who knew Jed intimately, someone who could illuminate his past, his debts, and his propensity for savagery. Harmony Gulch guarded its secrets jealously, but Esmeralda was prepared to wrest them free, one by one. Her son deserved retribution, and she wouldn't rest until his murder paid the price. Snake Eye Jed now occupied the apex of her suspect list, and she would become his wraith, shadowing his every move, poised to strike when the moment presented itself. Confrontation in the saloon. The Golden Nugget's batwings burst inward as Esmeralda crossed the threshold, a wave of acrid beer and cheap liquor assaulting her nostrils. Sawdust whispered beneath her worn leather boots as her gaze, sharp as flint, swept the room. The tinny piano music, a desperate attempt at merriment, only amplified the tension coiled within her. There he was, tucked away at a back table, cradling a glass. Snake Eye Jed Hawkins. Recognition flickered across his features, quickly replaced by a carefully cultivated indifference. Esmeralda, a surprise, though not a welcome one, to find you darkening our doorway. Save your breath, Jed, she retorted, her voice slicing through the saloon's clamor. She advanced, each footfall a percussive threat against his composure. He waved a hand at the vacant chair. Be my guest, though I'm footing my own bill this evening. She ignored the invitation, looming over him, casting his face in shadow. Samuel uncovered a fortune, Jed, a strike substantial enough to alter destinies. Jed drained his glass, his throat working visibly. Rumors, nothing more. Samuel always did embellish a tale. Don't insult me. I know my son, and I know you were his partner. Were, Jed stressed, his gaze skittering around the room, refusing to meet hers. Past tense. We split ways weeks back. He chased his phantom gold. I pursued other ventures. Closure. Closure arrived with Samuel in a pine box. Esmeralda countered, her tone a low rumble. Jed slammed his empty glass down. The sharp crack drew stares. Are you accusing me, woman? I had a fondness for Samuel. Disagreements, certainly, but I'd never lay a hand on him. Wouldn't you? The lure of gold corrupts, Jed, especially those of your ilk. Leaning in, her stare impaled him. Whereabouts were you on the night of Samuel's demise? He squirmed in his seat. I was right here, at the Nugget, dealing cards. Esmeralda arched a brow, skepticism etched on her face. Any witnesses to your marathon game? Jed's gaze darted towards the bar. A boy, barely 10 summers old, wiping down the sticky surface, caught his eye. A near imperceptible nod was exchanged. The boy, thin and grimy, edged towards them, apprehension clouding his young features. Mr. Hawkins was here all night, ma'am, playing poker steady. I can vouch for it. Esmeralda scrutinized the boy, the manufactured earnestness in his expression, the faint tremor in his fingers. A fabrication, cruelty constructed. All night, you affirm? He never stepped out. Even for a moment? The boy gulped. Nope, never left the table. Esmeralda's gaze returned to Jed, hardening. A convenient alibi, Jed, particularly given how jumpy your little Confederate looks. Did you grease his palms to perjure himself on your behalf? Jed's pretense crumbled. His face bloomed with angry color. Get out, Esmeralda. You're stirring trouble. Merely posing inquiries, Jed. Inquiries that warrant answers. She leaned closer, her voice a velvet threat. And I will persist until I unearth the truth. He lurched to his feet, sending his chair crashing backward, the din resonating in the sudden hush. I told you, I had no involvement. Leave me in peace. The saloon fell silent, every eye fixed upon them. Esmeralda stood firm, unyielding in the face of his outburst. You can flee, Jed, she declared, her voice ringing in the sudden quiet. But you cannot outrun truth. And truth finds its way to daylight, invariably. Jed glared, his face a canvas of fury and something deeper, something she couldn't quite decipher. Fear, perhaps. He whirled around and bolted from the saloon, shoving past the saloon doors and vanishing into the dusty thoroughfare. Esmeralda watched him disappear, her pulse hammering in her ears. She was closing in. Jed's reaction, the boy's flimsy lie, it all pointed towards culpability. Turning to the anxious boy, still hovering near the bar, she asked, "How much did he pay you to lie for him?" The boy flinched, his eyes wide with alarm, but said nothing. Esmeralda didn't press him, not now. He was merely a pawn, a minor piece in a much grander scheme. A scheme she was bound and determined to prevail in. The sheriff's reluctance. The saloon doors crashed behind Jed, the sound a harsh period at the end of Esmeralda's simmering anger. She pivoted, her gaze sharpening as it landed on Sheriff Clem Abernathy, who was attempting to disappear into the murky corner like a misshapen shadow. "Well, Sheriff, gonna gawk, but do your sworn duty." Clem shifted his bulk, a tapestry of discomfort etched on his face. He worried his damn collar. "Now, Esmeralda, let's not rush to judgment. Jed's a character, I grant you, but that doesn't make him guilty of murder." He bolted, Clem. He fled the moment I looked him square and spoke the truth. "Speaks volumes, Sheriff." She advanced on him, each step a deliberate strike. "My son's dead, slain for his gold, and Snake-Eyed Jed Hawkins is steeped in it." A scattering of patrons, emboldened by the lull in potential mayhem, began to eavesdrop, their faces a blend of morbid fascination and unease. Clem caught their attention, his discomfort deepening into full-blown dread. He loathed the spectacle. Spectacles meant paperwork, and paperwork meant forfeiting his afternoon naps. "Esmeralda," he began, his voice dropping to a hushed plea. "I know you're grieving, truly, but accusations require evidence. Concrete evidence. Not just gut feelings." "Gut feelings?" Her laugh was a brittle shard of sound. "My son's blood screams for justice, and you dismiss that as feelings? I'll unearth your proof, Clem. I will, even if I have to do your job myself. Or are you confessing you're intimidated by Jed Hawkins?" The word hung, thick and palpable. Clem stiffened. Lazy, perhaps. Deliberately slow, possibly. But a craven? Never. Not that he'd admit. The saloon's collective stare bore down on him. He was cornered. He sighed, the sound the weary expulsion of air from aged bellows. "Fine. I'll investigate, but don't expect miracles. Hawkins is slick as greased lightning." "Then sharpen your wits," Esmeralda countered, her gaze unwavering. "Each wasted hour grants Hawkins further escape. Commence with the mine. That's where Samuel discovered his vein. That's likely where Hawkins last saw him." Clem muttered something about paperwork and meddling women, but he yielded with a nod. "All right, the mine it is. At first light." Immediately, Esmeralda corrected, brooking no argument. "Every tick of the clock widens Hawkins' lead. We leave now." The sun was already sinking, painting elongated, grotesque silhouettes across the terrain as they rode towards the mine. Clem, forever winded, trailed behind, his mount laboring under his considerable weight. Esmeralda led the way, her posture ramrod straight, her eyes sweeping the horizon. The mine was a jagged tear in the landscape, a brutal violation of the otherwise idyllic panorama. The air, damp and heavy, carried a metallic tang. Blood. Clem dismounted with a protesting groan, his face already shimmering with perspiration. "Right, let's make this quick." A glance and then back to town. Esmeralda ignored him, her attention riveted to the ground at the entrance. The earth was churned, scuffed, a clear tableau of a violent encounter. Snapped branches littered the area, alongside dark, crimson stains on the rocky soil. "Feels like more than feelings, Sheriff," she observed, her voice tight with controlled fury. Clem swallowed, his eyes widening as he registered the scene. He'd seen his share of scuffles, bar brawls spilling into the street. But this exuded a different aura. Raw, brutal. Esmeralda ventured into the mind's maw, her eyes adjusting to the deepening gloom. The air chilled, the silence deepened. She picked up a small, shimmering object from the floor. A poker chip, its mother-of-pearl surface elaborately etched. She recognized the emblem instantly. Jed Hawkins' calling card, the chip he favored at the saloon. She presented it to Clem, her expression a thundercloud. Recognize this, Sheriff? Seems our slippery Hawkins left his mark. Justice on horseback. Dust devils danced in the main street as Jed Snake Eye Hawkins, face slick with sweat, spurred his roan gelding towards the edge of Harmony Gulch. He rode low, his hat pulled down, trying to blend into the shimmering heat haze rising from the parched earth. He hadn't packed, hadn't even bothered to grab his lucky deck of cards. Just his saddlebag stuffed with a few nuggets and a burning need to put as much distance as possible between himself and the mine. And Esmeralda, he could feel her eyes on him, even without looking back. A prickling sensation crawled across his skin, a cold premonition that mirrored the chill in his gut. He'd seen the sheriff's face after they'd emerged from the mine, the look of slow, grim understanding dawning in his eyes. Clem Abernathy wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, but even he couldn't ignore the poker chip. Jed risked a glance over his shoulder. Too late. A lone rider was silhouetted against the horizon, her horse a dark, purposeful shape against the blinding sky. Esmeralda. He cursed under his breath, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. He'd hoped to get a head start, but the woman rode like a demon. He kicked the roan harder, the horse responding with a burst of speed. The wind whipped at his face, carrying the scent of sage and fear. He had to reach the border. The law wouldn't follow him across state lines. But Esmeralda was gaining. Her horse, a powerful black mare, ate up the ground with relentless strides. Jed could hear the thunder of its hooves growing louder, closer. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard, the cold steel a momentary comfort against his clammy palm. He didn't want to shoot her, didn't want to kill anyone else. But he wouldn't hang for Samuel's gold. He reined in the roan abruptly, turning to face his pursuer. The horse danced nervously, its breath coming in ragged gasps. Esmeralda halted a few yards away, her face a mask of grief and fury. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows, painting the scene in hues of blood, orange, and despair. Going somewhere, Jed? Her voice was low, dangerously calm. It sent a shiver down his spine. He forced a nervous laugh. Esmeralda, just heading into town. Thought I'd grab a drink at the saloon. You lie like you breathe, Jed. She dismounted, her movements fluid and graceful despite the rage that burned in her eyes. She didn't draw a weapon, but Jed knew she didn't need one. Her presence alone was a weapon, sharp and unforgiving. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, his bravado crumbling. The mine, Jed. The poker chip. Samuel. Each word was a hammer blow. He shifted in his saddle, avoiding her gaze. It was an accident. A fight. We both wanted the claim. An accident. Her voice cracked with pain. You left him to die, Jed. For gold. He swallowed hard, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. He attacked me. I was defending myself. Esmeralda took a step closer, her eyes blazing. He trusted you. He called you a friend. Things change, Jed mumbled, his voice barely audible. Tell me what happened, Jed. Tell me the truth. The silence stretched, broken only by the snorting of the horses and the distant cry of a hawk. He could feel the weight of her grief, the crushing force of her determination. He knew he couldn't outrun her, couldn't outlie her. He closed his eyes, the image of Samuel's lifeless body seared into his memory. The glint of gold, the desperation, it all came rushing back, a torrent of guilt and regret. It was the gold, he whispered, his voice hoarse. We found a vein bigger than anything we'd ever seen. We argued about splitting it, about who deserved more. He opened his eyes, pleading with her for understanding. He came at me with a pickaxe. I panicked. You killed him. It wasn't a question. He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. I didn't mean to. It just happened. Esmeralda didn't move, didn't speak. Her silence was more damning than any accusation. "I'm sorry," he choked out, the words hollow and meaningless. She simply stared at him, her face a mask of cold, implacable justice. The setting sun glinted off a single tear, tracing a path down her cheek. He knew, in that moment, that his life was over, not just because of the law, but because of the look in her eyes. He'd robbed her of her son, and in doing so, he'd condemned himself. Harmony restored. The weight of his admission settled over the morning like a shroud, suffocating as the aroma of wet soil. Jed, defeated, stood with slumped shoulders, every ounce of resistance gone. Esmeralda's unwavering stare burned into him, a brand of judgment he couldn't escape. Running, he realized with cold certainty, was futile from her, from the truth within himself. Then, the approach of horses shattered the silence. Clem Abernathy, his sheriff's badge catching the weak sunlight, rode into view, flanked by 2 deputies. He hauled back on the reins, dust devils dancing around his boots. His gaze swept from Esmeralda, her face a study in sorrow and bitter vindication, to the broken figure of Jed. "Hawkins," Clem stated, his voice devoid of its usual lazy cadence. "You're under arrest for the murder of Samuel Vargas." Jed offered no resistance as the deputies slapped on the cuffs. The cold steel encircling his wrists echoed the guilt that had festered for days. He avoided Esmeralda's gaze as they escorted him toward Harmony Gulch. He hadn't earned the right to meet her eyes. The news ripped through Harmony Gulch like a prairie fire. Jed Hawkins arrested, confession given, a tragedy revealed. The townsfolk, initially cold and suspicious towards Esmeralda, now watched her with a blend of remorse and wonder. Their jeers had turned to muted unease. They recalled their whispers, their cutting glances, their premature judgments of the grieving woman who dared to upset their settled existence. They had dismissed her, labeled her a meddler, an outsider. Now, they perceived her for what she was, a mother fueled by unyielding love, a force awakened by unbearable pain. A shift washed over the community. Snide comments and averted eyes were replaced by subtle nods of acknowledgement as Esmeralda navigated the streets. Some offered tentative condolences, others left food and flowers at her humble dwelling. A meager offering, but a start toward healing. Esmeralda received their gestures with quiet grace. Forgiveness was not granted, not yet, but neither was she dismissive. She understood that amends required time and effort, and Harmony Gulch, like Jed Hawkins, had a debt to settle. The day of Samuel's internment dawned bright and clear. The townsfolk congregated at the small cemetery overlooking the gulch, their faces etched with somber reflection. They watched Esmeralda, her face etched with grief but firm, lower the plain wooden coffin into the waiting earth. Reverend Peabody, better known for hellfire sermons than gentle comfort, offered words of solace, his voice notably subdued. He spoke of Samuel's kindness, his gentle nature, the bitter irony of his end. The gold was unspoken, but present in every mind. Esmeralda stepped forward, clutching a small, time-worn pouch. Opening it, she revealed the gold nugget that had ignited such avarice and violence. It glittered sharply in the sunshine, a symbol of shattered hopes and bitter consequence. With a trembling hand, she placed it inside the coffin, laying it to rest alongside Samuel's still, cold fingers. "Rest now, my son," she murmured, her voice thick with sorrow. "Your trials are over. May this gold forever remind those who remain that true riches lie not in the earth, but in the unbreakable bonds of love and fidelity." As the grave diggers filled the grave, Esmeralda stood in silence, her gaze locked on the disturbed earth. The townsfolk dispersed slowly, heads lowered, hearts laden with regret. The silence was broken only by the mournful cry of a lone hawk circling above. In the days that followed, Harmony Gulch embarked on a path toward recovery. The gold mine remained untouched, a stark reminder of the tragedy's toll. The town, humbled by what had transpired, began to reevaluate its values. They learned a hard lesson. Judging others on appearances or gossip could yield disastrous outcomes. That true metal resided not in wealth or authority, but in compassion and empathy, and that even in the darkest depths, hope could blossom anew. Harmony Gulch had irrevocably changed. Laughter had quieted, replaced by thoughtful reflection. Greed had been supplanted by remorse, and the memory of Samuel Vargas and his resilient mother would perpetually underscore the cost of prejudice and the enduring strength of love. Esmeralda lingered in Harmony Gulch for some time, tending to Samuel's final resting place, offering quiet words to those who sought guidance. She discovered a measure of serenity, comforted by the knowledge that her son's life had not been lost without purpose, that it had, in some way, helped to restore a lost sense of harmony to a community teetering on the brink of moral collapse.